All right, we're here with Paul Thacker. Paul, you are an investigative reporter who just wrote this piece. I'm going to show everybody right now. COVID-19 researcher blows the whistle on data integrity issues in Pfizer's vaccine trial. So would you like to give everybody a quick introduction of who you are and then give us the Reader's Digest version before we dive into this? I got a ton of questions from our viewers on locals, and just a quick plug to everybody, AllisonMorrow.locals.com. When I know I'm going to interview someone, I usually post it ahead of time. You can put your questions in and I'll make sure to get to them. But Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's dive into the bullet points of this.
So I'm a reporter who I spent many years actually running investigations inside the Senate, where I first started looking into the pharmaceutical industry. There's a subset of congressional employees who run investigations. They're on specific committees. It's just like a couple hundred people, and I did that job for many years, looking at specifically into the pharmaceutical industry, because I was on a committee that had oversight over Medicare and Medicaid, which are the two big healthcare plans coming out of the United States, and they're about 20% of the budget or something like that. So mostly we were looking at corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. And I think the big about this story, the thing you need to know is that we got a whistleblower that came to us. She's a woman who spent a couple decades doing research for various companies. And she had gone to work at a company called Ventavia, which is a research group out in Texas. And they were tapped to do a very high rolling part of the clinical trial for Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. And as soon as she arrived, she saw a lot of really problematic issues going on there. People were falsifying data. Patients were being unblinded. You had employees that were just like not trained effectively. And so she brought this to the attention of the executives at Ventavia. They didn't really want to hear it. She then filed a complaint with the FDA, and later that day she was fired. And when she came to us, she brought recordings, photos, emails, and other documents from the company.
Let me go to that first point, the falsifying data. Can you give us a few examples of what happened there?
Well, I mean, what happened was they had been detecting this inside of the company itself. They had been detecting that employees had been falsifying data. So data was being entered incorrectly. So I don't want to go into the exact nature of it, but data was being falsified.
Do you not want to go into the exact nature of it because of legal reasons?
Well, I mean, there's emails where the emails say the employees were falsifying information. Like what exactly is being falsified, that's what the company said. The company said that their employees were falsifying information. I'm not going to go into I don't know what Ventavia meant by that, because that's what they said.
Okay, and explain again who this company is in relation to Pfizer.
It's a contract research group. So the vast majority of clinical trials, so like when you read about a clinical trial, a new drug comes online, in this case, it's a vaccine, the companies don't actually run those clinical trials themselves. So what you'll need is a certain number of patients for a clinical trial. And, they're going to ask someone in Florida to do part of it, someone in North Dakota. They're going to contract this research out. And when people sign contracts, the contract will say essentially that they're going to, provide, or they're going to test the product on so many patients. And so in this case, you had about close to 45,000 patients. And so Pfizer had to ask a bunch of different groups across the country to, enroll patients. And then what you do is you get 150 patients here, 300 patients here, and then that's how you get to your final number that you need for your study.
When you were talking about patients were unblinded, I think maybe some folks may not understand what that means. Can you explain that as well?
It's a little complicated, and I don't think it really helps to get down into the weeds on this, but essentially what happens is in a study, you're not supposed to know who is getting the drug and who is not getting the drug. And then that becomes what's called unblinded at the end. But in this case, the unblinding was happening during the clinical trial, and that can harm the integrity of the research itself.
Before we get to the rest of this video, don't forget you can support my work by also checking out my sponsors and having a glass of wine or a cup of coffee in honor of free speech. The first is AllisonWinePromo.com, Allison with 1L, winepromo.com. You get 50% off of my favorite Argentinian Malbecs and 50% off of shipping. They have switched out the 3 bottles from the last pairing, so check them out. Many of these are high altitude wines. They're very robust. They use no flavoring, no filtering, no dyes, and no excess chemicals. But if you need something to wake you up, like a strong cup of coffee, check out twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. They've got a wide variety of roasts. These are high altitude, shade grown Nicaraguan coffees that are also USDA certified organic. They also do a lot of great work to help prevent sea turtle nests from being poached. You can support their work by also going to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison and become a sponsor. And they'll even show you video of when the sea turtle nests that they're protecting are hatched. So check out my sponsors and support free speech wherever you are. Okay, I wanted to bring people to this part of your article. And real fast, tell everybody where they can go to read this, just so that before we get any further, they can go read it for themselves.
This is at the BMJ, which is the British Medical Journal. And you can just search BMJ and it'll pop up. This article is actually free and available for everyone. All the COVID-19 studies are free and available. Okay.
So here you're talking about a history of lax oversight with the FDA, right? So here you're saying that the agency's oversight capacity is severely under-resourced. If the FDA receives a complaint about a clinical trial, this person, Elizabeth Weckner, if I'm saying that right, president of Citizens for Responsible Care and Research Incorporated, says the agency rarely has the staff available to show up and inspect, and sometimes oversight occurs too late. You cite a specific example here. But then we scroll down to Ventavia. A former Ventavia employee told the BMJ that the company was nervous and expecting a federal audit of its Pfizer vaccine. People working in clinical research are terrified of FDA audits. I don't know why they're so afraid of them, she said, but she said she was surprised the agency failed to inspect Ventavia after an employee had filed a complaint. You would think if there's a specific incredible complaint that they would have to investigate it. So I guess big picture, could you explain why that is of concern with this specific vaccine?
Well, it's not necessarily about this vaccine. It's about the way FDA functions in general. You know, FDA is a regulatory body, and as part of the regulatory process, they're supposed to be taking a look at these clinical trials. So they do. The regulation the FDA provides is at multiple levels, right? So they will put together their panels to approve drugs. They will then maybe put together panels to if there's safety effects found in a drug. And one aspect of this is the regulatory process for these clinical trials. And what you see is that there's almost no oversight over these issues. So what you find is that of the clinical trial sites that are out there in America, they tend to review maybe 1% of them. Now, in the case of this specific clinical trial for the COVID-19 Pfizer's vaccine clinical trial, there were 153 sites scattered across, I don't want to say if there is in America, they may have been some abroad, but there were 153 sites. I think those were all in America. And the FDA inspected 9 of them. And what they did not inspect was the one site for which someone emailed a complaint to them at Ventavia. They never showed up at Ventavia.
Here you have these concerns raised in her 25 September email to the FDA. Jackson wrote that Ventavia had enrolled, what you were saying, more than 1,000 participants in 3 sites. And then you list a dozen concerns she had witnessed. Participants placed in a hallway after injection and not being monitored by clinical staff, lack of timely follow-up patients who experienced adverse events, protocol deviations not being reported, vaccines not being stored at proper temperatures, mislabeled laboratory specimens, and then targeting Ventavia staff for reporting these types of problems. I'm curious. So, well, it says right after that, within hours, Jackson received an email from the FDA thanking her for concerns and notifying her that the FDA could not comment on any investigation. A few days later, Jackson received a call from an FDA inspector to discuss a report, was told no further information could be provided. She heard nothing further in relation to her report. So was the concern that she's letting them know and they're just not doing anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of obvious that when you're a regulatory body and someone calls in and complains that their employer is engaging in corrupt practices that regulatory body should then go in and inspect. And in this case, the FDA, for reasons that we don't understand, did nothing.
Okay, I want to bring up some questions from my locals community again. If you guys are watching this somewhere else, AllisonMorrow.locals.com, AllisonMorrow.locals.com. It's a great place to get a hold of me and post questions, like I said. And if you're watching us on YouTube specifically, definitely check out my other platforms, because it's difficult to have conversations like this on YouTube. I'm almost concerned about some of the stuff we've already talked about, but I may chance it. I don't know. What do you think, Paul? Should we roll the dice on YouTube and just put it all? It's terrible when you actually have documentation and you're still worried that YouTube's going to call it misinformation.
This is happening all the time. Like, that's a totally separate issue about the sort of censoring of information that's going on right now.
Yeah, we could definitely talk about it. Okay, so somebody, I remember seeing a question that somebody posted really quickly after I posted it, about it just being 1,000 patients in concern. Okay. It's my position to disclose the whistle on Ventavia, Pfizer contractor. This whistleblower was privy to shortcomings which affected 1,000 trial participants, but Pfizer had 43,000 other participants. So is it really significant what this person's saying if there's tens of thousands of others?
Well, I guess that depends upon how you draw the line around what the term is for significant. Like, there's an issue in science of significance. There's an issue, like a broader issue, of how people determine the idea of significance. I can tell you that former employees that I spoke to at Ventavia, they thought it was significant. They work in clinical trial research, and they thought it was significant.
Do you ever hear people say, yeah, but it's the contractor, it's not Pfizer? I mean, the way I look at it is, if like I contracted out my news to someone and I put it out there as fact, like in order to obtain something using that information, I feel like I'm responsible because I benefited from the use of it. What do you think when people say that to you?
Well, I mean, in this particular case, what we know that Pfizer was notified of the problems at Ventavia, and Pfizer took action by hiring Ventavia for 4 other clinical trials. So I think Pfizer's action kind of speak for themselves. Like, why do we need to comment on that? Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know?
Okay, did the FDA in fact use Pfizer's own study data to determine authorization for 5 to 11-year-olds to get their COVID-19 injections? And if so, how does this provide anything more than a rubber stamp of anything the drug company provides? Can you answer that question? Or is that outside your wheelhouse?
That's a lot of questions. That's a lot in that question. What I can tell you is that the FDA always relies upon. FDA does not do studies. FDA reviews research that is provided to them by companies. And so FDA is never going to go out and do their own study.
You know, I didn't give my disclaimer at the beginning, but this is not medical advice, guys, not legal advice. All right, do your own research, question everything. Paul's just here to talk about his report. So you got to still be a critical thinker and do the research yourself. Was this a new subject for you and your particular specialty? If new, how hard was it to come up to speed? It sounds like you have pretty well versed in the pharma world, but maybe this was a little bit different.
No, I worked for a senator, Senator Grassley, and so I've worked with a lot of whistleblowers. So, the thing you have to understand is that this is an issue about regulations and corruption, and so that's just basically evaluating the evidence you're provided to see if it holds up. And we had to go through I had to listen to a lot of recordings. I had to go through a lot of text messages. I had to go through a lot of documents. So that just takes time. It's literally just, 14 hours a day, for a couple weeks.
This person also said that they want to know if the whistleblower seems credible. Have you seen and read documents spoken of in the story? Yes, right, you have. So did it change your mind on the subject after interviewing this person, or were you already predisposed?
I guess I can't answer, did it change my mind on what? I think the thing that, the thing you want to understand from this is that what this really shows you is that these are products that are not, very well regulated. I was just looked up, after the story came out, I just Googled Pfizer clinical trial and the term rigorous. And there's a lot of stuff on the internet about Pfizer clinical trial and rigorous. You know, I don't know if you could write those words now, but people will. I'm sure they will.
So, I guess, I don't know if this is too specific on that end, but please ask your whistleblower how many trial participants were injured and had to leave the trial and not go through the different phases. Do you know the answer to that?
No, that some of that might be found in the study itself.
Okay. FDA may be understaffed, but there may be many more problems with it. FDA user fees receive major funding from pharmaceutical companies whose products it assesses. Yes, there's certain practicality there, but how about a conflict of interest? Does the FDA really have the capability or competency to make good decisions on these drugs, vaccines? Americans put a lot of trust in the FDA, but should we? I mean, you don't have to answer the trust part as a journalist, I guess. Should you? But what about that other stuff?
I mean, the issue about the user fees, I mean, look, it comes down to a really basic issue. I mean, yes, we're funding the FDA in many ways from the drug companies, and that essentially turns the FDA, that turns the drug companies into customers of the FDA. And the way to fix that is kind of obvious. It's to raise taxes and have taxpayers fund the FDA. Taxpayers don't want to fund the FDA, so we're going to be using user fees. So until there's a movement in America that says we want to raise taxes to effectively fund these federal agencies, then you're going to continue to see them being funded through user fees. It's not complicated. The money's going to come from somewhere.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't discussed related to your article that you would like to make sure people know?
Not really. I think we've gone over most of it. I think the take-home thing to understand is that, this is what this issue is about is, a whistleblower has come forward and said that there were serious problems at a research site for a very important clinical trial. She reported this to the FDA. The FDA did nothing. The company knew. The company then turned back around and hired the research organization again. And what we don't know is how many other instances did this happen. I mean, as soon as you understand that the FDA was notified that there were problems at this place at Ventavia and they didn't even show up to look at it, you have to wonder how many other instances were there in which people complained about problems happening at their employer and the FDA did nothing. How many other instances when Pfizer knew that there were problems there and they hired this company anyway, how many other instances are there in which there were problems at other contract researchers and Pfizer went ahead and hired them anyway?
What's the response been to your article so far? Have you gotten interest from other big mainstream outlets to discuss it?
There's something going on maybe right now. I don't know yet. I think Pfizer's probably trying to make it stop. That's their job.
Okay. Oh, I'm just curious.
I'm doing my job to try to write good stories, and Pfizer's doing their job, which is to try to stop it. So we just have we're at a
competing interests. I'm just curious what you think though about a lot of the big name, big budget corporate news entities that have the money to and time really to do the research that you've had to do as a freelance independent journalist, and in what in my opinion seems like a serious hesitancy to talk about these vaccines in any way that is negative. And so I always wonder about the load being put on people like yourself who, like I said, don't have $1 million, multi-million-dollar budget behind you, and you're doing this kind of work. And then we were watching CNN or we're watching Fox or MSNBC, and we might be seeing like little dabbles of questions, but nothing that's really hard hitting. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that as a journalist. It just seems like this is one of those topics that is very, it seems like there's just a lot of hesitancy to talk about it.
Yes, that is the one vaccine hesitancy that I do agree with. There is a hesitancy to discuss issues with the vaccines. And it's not, I've spoken about this with so many other reporters in which, when you look at other products, other medicines that are regulated by the FDA, there's oftentimes skepticism amongst the media about them, I mean, for good cause. But for some reason, the normal way in which we discuss products regulated by the FDA seems to not apply when it comes to vaccines. Now, this is because of, it's obvious what's going on. There's a very well coordinated campaign by pharmaceutical industry to ensure that people do not discuss potential problems with vaccines. I mean, that's just a reality. And you can talk to any kind of reporter and they'll tell you that privately. I don't know, like, what the solution to that is. But I mean, in my head, I think people are not stupid. I mean, people who are reading newspapers, who are watching television, they're sensing this too. I mean, they're not, it's not like the media are these like super smart people that exist in this, particularly rarefied ecosystem. They're just regular people. And, average people in the public are recognizing that this is going on, and they see that you're not supposed to discuss these issues at all. Like, there's censoring that's going on. And I don't think this is healthy. I think that in the end, you have to get out and talk about these things. And, because I think what it does is, I think a lot of this overt attempts to try to shut people down from even discussing issues, is probably, I mean, it's not, I mean, there's a woman who was at the British Medical, not British Medical Journal, at the BBC, who I saw her tweet like early this year about how she was being called an anti-vaxxer because she was asking questions about the efficacy and safety of a particular vaccine when it came out. I mean, there's just a kind of nuttiness around this.
Do you feel like this vaccine has been specifically more controversial than just talking about vaccines and pharmaceutical companies in general? Or do you feel like there was always kind of just been concern over discussing that topic, mandates around that, like with schools, for instance, or it's just, in other words, is this just a more amplified version of hesitancy that there has been in the journalism world around this topic? Or is this totally new, in your opinion?
There's been a really weird shift and kind of just a different way of covering vaccines, which I find just incredibly odd. It's very obvious. It's very telling. Exactly why it is, I don't know. I don't look at vaccines as some separate issue. I look at them as just any other kind of product that is being put out by companies, and you just examine them all the same way. I mean, like, is the company telling you that this thing, is that these tires are going to last longer than they actually will? Are they lying to you about gas mileage on this car? It's to me, it's just the same issues. You just look at these issues as products and try to understand if the company's being honest and direct about the quality and the safety of the product. It's a pretty simple issue.
Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it.